Bam Adebayo broke out of his slump in Mexico City, so we break down what went right for Miami's big man. Plus, with the turmoil in Milwaukee, is it possible to explore a trade for a Bucks superstar? The answer might surprise you on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day, and we have a great episode for you today to start off the week. We'll start talking about the latest surrounding Giannis and his future in Milwaukee, plus another star that the Heat could target between now and the trade deadline. But first, your favorite podcast now is a newsletter introducing the Locked On Heat daily newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com to start your day with the all-new free Locked On Heat newsletter. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are playing real or fake on today's show now that we're nearly 2 weeks into the NBA season, so we'll discuss whether what we're seeing and hearing is real or fake. We'll start, David, with Saturday night's win over the Wizards in Mexico City. Bam Adebayo goes off for 32 points and made 3 of his 5 three-pointers. After averaging 11 points through Miami's first 4 games, David, is Bam's breakout against Washington real or fake?
I don't think it's real. I don't think it's fake, though. I have to quantify it like that, but I think the reality is, and I know I'm changing the rules of the game, unfortunately, but
Right off the bat.
I just think, I can't read into what happened given Washington's core of centers and the way they defended him and think that this is going to be the new normal moving forward, because we just saw too much over the 4-game sample size where Bam wasn't necessarily aggressive. And so what I looked at on Saturday night was Bam getting that shot early in terms of the 3-point shot, and it really seemed to give him the boost of confidence and get him into an early rhythm where he was able to get into a much more diverse game, going 3 of 5 from 3-point range, including the mid-range jumper, attacking the basket. But he was just also going against subpar centers from Washington's rotation. And I just don't know that you can look at what happened against Washington and think that that's going to be the case against better quality opponents that'll do a much better job of defending him at a higher level. So I'm, like I said, it's great. We know he's capable of these moments, which is why I think there's some reality to it. But I also think there's something unsustainable, which is why there's a little bit of fakery mixed in there.
A little bit of fakery mixed in there. It's more real than the averaging 11 points, but
Yes.
but it's also fake because he's not going to average 32 points a game for the rest of the
Yes.
season. So I do agree with you. It is more real. It is a little fakier, as much as it is fakier. But it's a great point that you make with the Wizards. They're not a good team, and Bam Adebayo did damage against a bad basketball team. They started Alex Sarr, who is, by all accounts, not even good for a rookie. And that doesn't mean he can't be good in the future, but right now he stinks, and that's okay. But for Bam, that means that he gets to go off for 32 points. The part of it that to me is a little bit more real in terms of anything. Opening series of the game, opening Miami Heat possession, what do? They get Bam Adebayo post up. They cleared him out, left side of the block, everybody else on the other side of the court, and they let him go to work. That was an indication that they are trying to feed him, that they are trying to get him the ball in his spots. It's exactly what Eric Spoelstra said he was going to do, and then he did it. And so I think that part of, hey, you know what? Maybe we're a little bit too gung-ho on this whole 5-out offense thing. We do need to make sure that Bam gets comfortable in his sweet spots. Let's draw up some of these early in the game to get him going. And then what happened? Well, he went 3 for 5 from 3-point range. It was the best floor spacing game of Bam Adebayo's career, but they got him going early. And I thought that was really telling, and I thought it was really important. And I bet you against Sacramento, within the first couple possessions, we'll see the exact same thing, trying to get Bam into the post. And I know it's Domantas Sabonis. It's a very different defensive presence than Alex are, but I don't think they care. I think they're saying, look, we're going to feed him early. Let's try to get him going. And then hopefully that spreads out to the rest of his game. And that's exactly what happened against the Wizards. I think that'll be the strategy going forward. Let's get this guy going early. If you think about anybody on the team that needs to get going early, it feels like it's Bam. Because Jimmy's just, even if you try to get Jimmy going early, he won't do it, right? He'll get going late. That's Jimmy time. Tyler Herro, Terry Rozier, they're in a rhythm. And they're not, frankly, as important as Bam Adebayo. You got to get him going early. So I think that part of it is real.
Great point. I think that it does seem like a sound strategy. You know, we heard Spo talk about it following the loss of the Knicks. It's just too important, and Bam is too crucial to Miami's chances of success. You can have an off game for either Terry or Tyler. We've seen both struggle. I think Tyler has been much more consistent, and neither of them have been always as consistently efficient. We saw Terry struggle for sure against the Washington Wizards, and it still resulted in a lopsided victory for Miami. So you can sustain those, but you need to get Bam to be more productive, because I think that's the key to Miami's success. We talked about the possibility of, well, maybe he can just be a lesser player, not as interested in the offensive end, and just continue to contribute a number of winning ways. Sure, but then you're going to have those tough victories even against bad teams, and then you're going to lose against good teams. If you're going to beat good teams consistently, you need Bam to be a weapon. You need him to be aggressive. You need him to be comfortable and in rhythm. So if you're looking to get him going early on, and that seems like a sound strategy, I think we'll see that much more often. So I am insanely curious to see whether or not they duplicate that pattern against Sacramento. I think he can attack Sabonis. Sabonis is a stout defender, not great. He'll give up points, and I think Bam has looked forward to that matchup, especially when considered they might be vying for an all-star spot when he was in Indiana or something like that, or just to kind of prove himself, because there's
now for an all-NBA spot.
Exactly. So there's been a long-standing narrative of who's a better player. Sabonis has been much more productive than Bam. I still think Bam is a better player overall, given what he does on the defensive side and what he does as a playmaker. But I think it's much more even maybe than it's been in seasons past. So I'd be curious to see if Bam is able to kind of continue that aggression from Mexico City, and maybe this will be the start of something better for him.
So Bam is 7-8 all time against Sabonis. So Sabonis does have the win-loss advantage, which is a little surprising considering that his Pacers teams were only about average. And then these Kings teams have been good, so that part of it's not surprising. But yeah, Sabonis isn't a good defender. I don't think that's fair. But he's a physical presence. And if Bam wants to post him up the way that he posted up Alex Sarr, that's not going to happen, right? Where Sabonis does struggle is when you put him in space. You bring him out on a pick and roll, and then you attack him. And that's where Bam has had his advantages against Sabonis in the past. So it might not look the same way as it did against Alex Sarr, but you could still get Bam going early, but maybe it's a little bit more high screen and roll action, feeding Bam early on that like short roll part and letting him go to work. Or maybe it's just him doing that. Maybe it's not even getting to the rim, but just getting that free throw line jumper. I also think the 3-point shooting is going to be there for Bam in this game too, because Sabonis isn't going to come all the way up and trap or come up to the level of the screen. They're typically going to let him drop. And so I think there's going to be opportunities there. And if you look at Sacramento's starting lineup, they are going all in on offense. Right? Like they're not even starting Keon Ellis, who's their best perimeter defender. They're going with Doug McDermott, or in the games where Kevin Huerter is not available because he's out with some sort of illness right now. So you've basically got De'Aaron Fox, who's gotten better as a point of attack defender, but Bam's not his responsibility. And then you've got Kevin Huerter or Doug McDermott. Then you've got DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, and Domantas Sabonis. And Murray is maybe their best perimeter defender of that group, and I don't think that he's special at that end. And so there's going to be an opportunity here for Miami's offense to get going, but that's how the Kings want to go. They say, hey, we're going to play an up and down offensive game, and we think we're better at that than you are, and we're going to beat you at our own game. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens, but that does sort of sow the fields for Bam to maybe have another big offensive night, and they're going to need it from him if they're going to win this game. The 3 of 5 shooting, not ready to call that real from 3-point range. But you know what? I'm buying that more than missing his first 8 3-point attempts. He's gotten into a rhythm, and this is the law of averages. This is how it works out. But I think Bam is comfortable enough with that 3-point shot that I expect it to keep going in at a respectable clip. What about you?
No, I do. He just looks so much more comfortable. Like when he hit that first shot, you could kind of see the relief wash over him, and it just carried through the rest of the game as well. When he had those opportunities, he wasn't shying away from it. There were a couple of possessions there where it was a lot like what we saw in the first 4 games, where maybe he had an open look and he didn't necessarily take it right away. But overall, I'd say when he had catch and shoot opportunities, he was willing to take them, and he recognized those opportunities. I think, like you said, they'll be available against Sacramento. my biggest concern is what happens in the defensive end for Miami. Not just Bam getting going, but also can Miami's perimeter defenders keep a guy like Murray, or you don't want to give McDermott his career high or his season high, which has been the norm for Miami in the past, where they've allowed some random player to get going and have a career high against them or a season high. So that is what I'm most curious about, whether or not they're able to kind of blend getting Bam going offensively and still duplicate some of the good defense they've played over the first few games of the season.
Prize Picks isn't a sponsor for us today necessarily, but maybe take the over on Doug McDermott's points on Prize Picks might be a good way to.
Keegan Murray too. He's had some big games against Miami.
You know what? Take the over on Bam's points while you're there. We've got more news on the Giannis front as more and more people point to Miami as a potential destination. But is there a major obstacle standing in their way of a potential Giannis deal? We'll talk about that next and more here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. This month is all about gratitude, and I'd like to shout out my son, Jake. He's turning 6 on Wednesday. It's a big birthday for him. They're all big birthdays when you're that young, but he's such a source of joy. He could be a difficult handful at times because he's 6 and then 5 or almost 6, and so that's normal. But you know what? He always adds something to my life. And this month, again, along with Jake, I would also like to point out something that probably doesn't get enough thanks, and that's ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything in this crazy world. It isn't easy. So here's a reminder, send some thanks to the people in your life, including yourself. So if you're thinking of maybe finding clear paths to understand your behaviors and the way that you do things and why you have to recognize the growth that you've made, then you're probably thinking of starting therapy. And if that's the case, then give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible, and it's suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire. It just takes a matter of minutes, and you get matched up with a licensed therapist. And if you have to switch therapists at any time for any reason, there's no additional charge. So let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today, and you get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. The best way to support the show is to like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. We're continuing our episode of Real or Fake, and there's more and more noise surrounding Giannis' future and a potential trade to the Miami Heat. Bill Ryder from CBS Sports reported last week that league executives are pointing to Miami and the Brooklyn Nets as potential suitors for Giannis. And then there was another report this morning that mentioned the Heat again, along with the Clippers. Howard Beck over at The Ringer said he checked out the CBS Sports report over the weekend with his own sources and that they confirmed that they were hearing the same thing. So the buzz around Giannis is most certainly real. That's the buzz. Are the Heat as a potential Giannis destination, though, real or fake, David?
That's a tricky one. Again, I would say it's fake on the surface. And we talked about this in a recent episode, and I was somewhat chastised by our audience because I said that the Heat would never or should never trade Bam in a package for Giannis Antetokounmpo. We questioned the fit, etc. It's not necessarily that they would entertain it. I was just thinking from a macro view, you can't build your centerpiece and call him your centerpiece the way they have with Bam Adebayo over the most recent seasons. And then when a superstar becomes available, albeit one as good as Giannis Antetokounmpo, say, you know what, we're going to just totally change the course of the franchise by trading our key player. Like, had LeBron James become available in 2010, would anybody have said, well, LeBron is clearly a better player, but you might have to trade Dwayne Wade for him? And if that's the case, would Miami have done it? I don't think so. Given that Dwayne brought a franchise championship in 2006,
that would be the key
it's not
difference.
Apples to oranges.
Yeah, that would is that Dwayne Wade was arguably it was one of the best 3 players in the world. That would be like trading Giannis for Luka right now. You'd be like, what's the point of that? Or Giannis for Jokic. You're like, I don't know. Does that really make a difference for us? Like, Bam.
I understand that Giannis is a much better player than Bam. Yeah, you're right. I can see there's a gap difference there in terms of their overall talent and what they contribute. But you do have to question, and you brought up a valid point when we had that episode, is that, if you're going to be trading whatever collection of players that would take in order to acquire Giannis, what does that leave behind? Does that put you in a clearer path towards a championship just because you have Giannis Antetokounmpo on the roster? Clearly, it's not working in Milwaukee, and while there are other extenuating circumstances there, it's not necessarily resulted in anything but one championship, despite the fact that he is a top 5 player every season, and he was at one time MVP, and he has been a defensive player of the year, et cetera. All the things that Miami has been lacking in terms of star level talent, Giannis has that, and it has resulted in just one championship, despite the fact he is now also 30 years old. So there's a lot to kind of parse there. As far as the reality of Miami's interest, I would say they're always curious. They're always exploring that. They're always going to kick the tires, and they're always going to try to figure out what it would take. I don't know what Miami's strategy would be, and I saw a lot of people say this. It's like, it doesn't matter. They're going to try to offer pennies on the dollars. And well, yeah, that's what you do generally. You try to go in with a low offer and see if you can find a way to pry him out of whatever situation he's in and hope for the best. Yes, it's burned them in the past. At the same time, I think it's still a sound strategy. You don't go in there offering your top level talent and whatever assets you might have on the roster in order to acquire a player like Giannis Antetokounmpo, despite the fact that he may or may not even be available. Like, that's the whole thing. It's like, there's buzz growing because, well, the Bucks are struggling. They're 1-6. They're at the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings. They've been terrible to start the season, but him and Damian Lillard both had monster games over the weekend, still resulted in a loss.
Yep.
So I could see why there's increased buzz regarding Giannis perhaps wanting out of Milwaukee. I'm just not sure I'm ready to buy it yet. I don't know. Giannis, I know he's talked about in the past, maybe exploring other opportunities and continuing to win, that he wants another championship in order to cement his legacy. That all sounds possible and likely. At the same time, I don't know that you want to give up being the star level player and giving up everything that you've meant to that franchise in that city and everything else, and to be able to have earned a championship there in order to see a trade. I think there's another name on that roster that might be worth exploring.
Giannis has said that he's willing to give all of that up, that he appreciates what Dirk meant to Dallas and Dwayne Wade means to Miami and Kobe means to the Lakers and all that stuff. But he's like, I want championships more than I want that. And if I have to choose, I'll choose the championships. And so, look, when there's people in front offices looking at Milwaukee just ready to implode, I think you do have to see and look at Giannis as somebody who's a flight risk there, right? And so, you're right. I'm with you. You can't buy it until he's actually requested the trade, right? You can't start counting on it and start building your offers until he's actually requested the trade. That said, if he does request the trade, I buy Miami as a potential suitor, but I'm also like we talked about on Friday, they have always routinely come in here trying to lowball. And if Giannis tries to force his way to Miami or New York or the Clippers, it's a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit like the Damian Lillard situation because he's still got 2 more years after this season left on his contract. It's going to be difficult for him to dictate wherever he wants to go. And then teams like Houston, San Antonio, Oklahoma City that are flush with draft picks and young players can just offer a boatload of all that stuff to Milwaukee. And Milwaukee, if Giannis goes in there and says, hey, trade me to one of my preferred destinations, we learned from that Damian Lillard experience that, hey, we don't have to do right by our star. If he demands the trade, then you're out of here, and we're going to do whatever is best in the name of the organization. And I expect that the Bucks would do exactly that. Now, that said, what could the Heat trade in a Giannis package? That's the other part that's a complication here. It's because the Milwaukee Bucks are thoroughly over that second apron. Like, even if they traded Bobby Portis into the Pistons cap space or something like that, they would still be well over the second tax apron. What does that mean? That means they can't aggregate salaries in a trade. That also means they can't take any more money back in a deal for Giannis. So that just complicates what it is that Miami can do, because Miami is above the first apron. And it's rather difficult for them to even get under that first apron here. So even if they traded Tyler Herro, Khalil Ware, Nikola Jovic, and Jaime Jaquez Jr., like all the young players, throw in a draft pick, plus Tyler Herro, that's still $9 million short of where they need to get to, because you essentially have to get exact money for Giannis and Miami to be able to negotiate a deal. Unless, of course, the Heat send another salary to a team like the Pistons, who are the only team with cap space. But they know they're the only team with cap space, so they're going to be able to have leverage over whatever deal that is. So they might be able to get a first-round pick out of Miami or something like that. But that's, a different situation. But that was what it would take. It would take some real cap gymnastics. And I think if anybody were going to be able to pull it off, it would be Andy Ellsberg in this front office. But it's hard, man. And they made it hard for a reason. This isn't hard by accident. The NBA does not want players like Giannis moving teams. That's why they made it so difficult. And so It's not just easy to make this happen. Now, if you threw Bam into the deal, that's a big $35 million salary. You could throw him in the deal plus a couple of these other guys. But then if you're the Miami Heat, you are losing some of your depth. Now, that could be worth it because you're getting Giannis at the end of the day, who could win an MVP, right? He's playing like an MVP this season, despite Milwaukee's record. But you would have to backfill all of those roster spots with minimum salary free agents. And then that would certainly take them over that second apron, which would only increase the amount of limitations that this team has in building around and retooling around Giannis. And again, it might be worth it if it's Giannis, Jimmy Butler, and hey, maybe if you're able to keep Bam and it's one of these other things, I don't know, but this is all kinds of things that the Heat have to consider. It's not as simple as, it's not like 2010 where it's like, oh, we can get LeBron, do it. It's not. It might seem ridiculous to even say that it's not that simple because it's Giannis at the end of the day. And maybe at the end of the day, that's what pushes the Heat over the edge. Say, look, all these cap gymnastics, all these hoops we got to jump through, it's worth it because it's Giannis, but you have to consider the hoops. You do have to consider them. That's just the new world that we live in. You mentioned the other guy. What if the star of the Bucks trade isn't Giannis? Could the Heat turn back to Damian Lillard? Could they even get him for less now? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $5 and bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Sometimes you're watching a game, and maybe you were watching that Dolphins game and you wanted to change the channel pretty quickly. You get a hunch in the middle of it. You can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play. You can do that and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Where do the Dolphins go from here, Wes? We talk about this every week.
They go to the bottom of the draft. Right. The top of the draft.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. It doesn't seem like there's a positive, and you can't place the blame on Tua. You know, so many people wanted to blame him
against
before.
Buffalo.
Yes,
they played well. It's just too little, too late. Like the team isn't broken, but the Tua injury at the beginning of the year derailed the season, and sometimes that just happens. It's like the Heat last year, right? Just injuries, throughout the whole year, and you lose a season that way.
Oh, there you go. If you want to, just go visit FanDuel.com so you can get started today. You can get started with just $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet, but only when you go visit FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Support the show by liking and subscribing on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. Let us know in the comment section what you think about Miami's ability to trade for Giannis, or perhaps this other superstar player. There's speculation even before the season that if things didn't go well in Milwaukee, that the Bucks could shop Damian Lillard and retool around Giannis. If that were to happen, it would make sense for the Heat to see about getting Damian Lillard again. David, is the possibility of the Heat calling about Lillard real or fake?
Yes, I think that's much more real than the Giannis one. I think Miami has in the past kind of said, oh, option A isn't available. Well, just out of curiosity, what's option B like? And what would it take for you to move on from that? We saw this, and I know I pointed it out a lot, and maybe it was a seminal moment in Heat history, but in 2003, they pulled a fast one on former Clippers owner Donald Sterling and their general manager there when they signed Elton Brand to an offer sheet. They knew that they were going to match that offer sheet when he was a restricted free agent. They wound up doing so. And what did it do? Well, that put them out of the running for another one of the restricted free agents, Lamar Odom. And so what did Miami do? They wound up swooping in, keeping him for a year. He was great in Dwayne Wade's rookie season. They achieved some playoff success. And then he was a pivotal part of the trade to acquire Shaquille O'Neal the following summer. So Miami's done this in the past. I think it makes a lot of sense. And given the struggles of Terry Rozier, we've liked some of the things that Terry's done, but some of the things that Terry's done haven't been so good. And given that, and given the volatility of Dame Lillard's offense and what he can provide, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think despite his age, despite his defensive misgivings, it's not that sizable a gap between that and a younger player in Terry Rozier. And as much as we were optimistic about what Rozier would be like this season, I don't think he's lived up to those expectations, as low as they were, and Dame Lillard far exceeds that. I know he's struggling. I know it's part of the problem, but I think there's just been bad vibes there. I just think as part of it is that he's not been happy in Milwaukee, from the fact that he was kind of forced into a city that he didn't necessarily want to go to. Had to. Yeah, he was. He was forced into a city he didn't want to, in a situation he didn't want to play with players that he didn't necessarily want to play with. In Miami, I think we would see more of the Portland version of Dame Lillard, and I think that Eric Spoelstra would find a much better way of maximizing what Lillard can do on this roster than what Doc Rivers has been able to do.
Well, with that, I have no question. But
Huh.
Damian Lillard's 34 years old. The numbers are good. Like, he's averaging 26 plus points per game this season. He is
Sure.
still a dynamic offensive player who can go off for 40 on any given night, right? Like, he is a valuable player. You add him to Bam and Jimmy, and you're talking about the vision that Miami saw when they were trying to get him 2 summers or last summer, right? Where, hey, this is the perfect floor spacer, the perfect guy who could just average 30 points per game for us so that Bam and Jimmy don't have to. So that Bam and Jimmy could do all the things that make them elite and special, which is not scoring the basketball in that
Right.
case. For Dame, that's exactly what makes him special. There's defensive concerns and all these things. Sure, absolutely. But I do think trading for Damian Lillard would improve the Miami Heat in a major way, and they have a better defensive infrastructure than Milwaukee does.
Yes.
And I think you could, at this stage, it's a little bit like Damian Lillard. You drove the car off the Portland lot, you brought him to Milwaukee. It didn't exactly shine the same way, and now you're trying to maybe sell that car a year later. It's not exactly a lemon, but it's not what you wanted if you're the Milwaukee Bucks. You don't need it anymore, right?
Right.
And so the original offer that the Heat would have tried to get Damian Lillard from Portland was Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, or Kyle Lowry, and then probably one or two of the young guys, whether it was Jaime Jaquez, Nikola Jovic, and then the draft picks, right? And that was before they moved one of those picks for Terry Rozier. So it could have been 2, maybe even 3 draft picks. It never got that far into negotiations to figure out if it was going to be 2 of the young guys, if it was going to be multiple draft picks, whatever it was. But that was essentially the basis of the offer. It would be less now. Like, whatever that would have been, it would be less now. I don't know that a draft pick would get moved, right? Like, we saw in the Karl Anthony Towns trade, when a player is making that much money, if you're the team trading that player, it's kind of a win just getting neutral value, right? You're not trying to win the trade anymore when a player is making that much money, not in the new CBA. And so, yeah, they traded Cat for Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, and that was the trade. So what would the Heat's version of that look like? It could be somebody like Tyler Herro. Maybe it's just Terry Rozier, a chunky salary like that. And then you add the salary that you need. Maybe it's, Duncan Robinson. Maybe it's one of the young players. Let's call it Nikola Jovic or something, although they'd probably be haggling over which one of those young players it is between Jovic, Jaime, and maybe Khalil Ware. I don't think any draft picks get moved in that kind of deal. And so let's call it this. So this actually works. I plug this into the trade machine. I use Terry Rozier's salary because it's smaller than Tyler Herro's salary. It's just a little bit easier to move. You do Terry Rozier, Duncan Robinson, and Nikola Jovic to Milwaukee. You have to move Thomas Bryant or like Josh Richardson or Alec Burks. Let's just call it Thomas Bryant to Detroit for cap space, just to make all the math work. So you give the Pistons like a second-round pick plus Thomas Bryant or something like that. And then you get Damian Lillard if you're Miami. What do you think about a trade like that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a great deal for Miami. Run the specifics again. What is it? It's
so Milwaukee
Nico?
gets Rozier. Milwaukee gets Rozier, Duncan, and Nico. That feels like it's not enough.
No, it does not. It does not. I don't know why Milwaukee would entertain it other than just to say, well, we're moving on from this experiment. Because I mean, I guess if they were truly enamored with the potential of Jovic, it might make a lot of sense. It gets some cap flexibility, I suppose, with Rozier's deal there. He's got one more year left on his contract after this season. So it's something. Maybe they could move Duncan to another team and find a way to get even more cap flexibility for them, so they wouldn't have to pay such a huge luxury tax this year. I see the potential there, but I agree with you. It just does not seem like it's enough there, even for a player like Dame Lillard, whose value may have somewhat decreased around the league.
Yeah, the only other way to build like an actual trade here is just including a lot of salary, which has a lot of different complications. Like if you put Tyler Herro in the deal and Duncan Robinson, that kind of that puts the deal at already. I mean, you could do it. It would be Tyler and Duncan Robinson, and that would work. But for Milwaukee, now you're not getting any of the young guys. And if you're Milwaukee again,
Tyler's a young guy.
Well, yeah, you're right. He's 24, but none of the Jovic's, none of the guys on the rookie scale contracts, which are very valuable in deals like this. But hey, Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson, that's very similar to Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. It's not, even though I think that's a better package for Cat, but Cat's also a better trade asset than Damian Lillard at this stage of their careers. So maybe it's something like that. Maybe at that point you throw in the first round pick. It's Tyler, Duncan, and a first. Maybe it's something like that. I don't know. But again, you're Milwaukee. You're not getting any. You're not really adding a ton of depth there. You're replacing Damian Lillard with Tyler Herro, and then Duncan Robinson's on that roster for what? Like Giannis can kick out to Duncan Robinson, but their issue isn't 3-point shooting, right? They've got Gary Trent Jr. on the roster still, I think they would be looking for guys like Haywood, Highsmith, like Jaime, like Nico, guys with some length, with some potential on the defensive end to help retool around Giannis. So it's not as easy as it looks is the point. But I do buy that Miami's potential interest in Damian Lillard, should it get to that point, would be real. And one other point on this before we move on, I got a speed round here for you that I want to get to. I wonder if the Bucks, like, what's the order of operations is another key question here with Milwaukee. It's
right.
Would you try to trade Damian Lillard in an effort to persuade Giannis to stay? Hey, look at this great haul we got for Damian Lillard. If that's the case, then they are going to want a lot for Dame. Like, they're going to want several rotation players. Hey, yes, we lost a star player in Damian Lillard, but look at all the depth we have. And give us another year, and we'll find a way to get you another superstar to pair you with, right? But right now, we just filled out our depth, which is more important than anything else, evidently. Maybe that's what the key is. Or maybe it's something like, hey, we got this blue chip young player who could be the next Damian Lillard, and we got some depth, or whatever it is. So... or does Giannis just look around and say, I don't care about any of this, just trade me now? And then you've got Damian Lillard stuck in Milwaukee. Or they trade Giannis first, and now maybe that relieves some of these cap concerns that would hinder them from trading Damian Lillard here, right? Because if you trade Giannis, you might as well just trade Dame, blow the whole thing up, go full Brooklyn Nets from a couple of years ago. But I think the order of operations is key here, but obviously very much up in the air. Okay. Real quick speed round. Real or fake? Tyler Herro shooting 44% on threes this year. Is that real or fake?
I think it's real. I think it's obviously going to drop a little bit, but I think we've seen a lot more catch and shoot opportunities. He's been collecting those. You've been talking about his elite numbers as a shooter for years now, and I think he's certainly gotten better looks as the offense has continued to settle and as he's found his rhythm in it. So I'm prepared to say that that's closer to real than it is fake.
I'm with you. It's real. You mentioned the catch and shoot numbers. He's 44% on catch and shoot threes. He's 44% on three-pointers overall. That's not a coincidence, right? That's because a majority of his three-pointers now are of the catch and shoot variety. His efficiency is just going to go up. Tyler Herro is very capable of being a plus 40% three-point shooter, and I think that's his future as long as he keeps embracing this role. Terry Rozier shooting 40% overall. Real or fake?
40% overall?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that's also real. I think he's struggling a little bit, but I think, that's close to where he's been for his career too. There are going to be some inefficiencies there. His shot just isn't falling. He's just a little too wild and a little bit too much dependent on step backs and creating space that way. And he's just also not powerful enough to finish at the rim at a high level. And that's a concern, is that he's just been struggling to shoot there, but that's always been part of his career. Yep. We were hoping for better with the new spacing and everything, that he'd get better looks and that he'd be able to convert those at a higher rate. Unfortunately, it just hasn't manifested.
I mostly agree with you. He's a 42% shooter for his career. I do expect it to get closer to that, but we're talking about the difference between 40% overall and 40%. So is it fake? Either way, it ain't good. So he's not a good finisher, never has been a good finisher. The one thing I do want to see, and I like so far, is that his shot attempts are down. So that 40% just stings a little bit less. He's at 14 field goal attempts per game this season versus in Charlotte, he was averaging 16, 17 field goal attempts per game. As Bam continues to get better, as we see more and more of Jimmy Butler maybe emerging in this offense, let's get that. Like, if he's shooting 12 attempts per game, I think that's probably ideal for this offense, because that means he's doing things different, more on the defensive end and more as a playmaker. Haywood Highsmith has not played in consecutive games this year. He's got 2 DNP CDs. There's just certain nights where he's out of the rotation. Is that real or fake?
I don't know what to make of that, to be honest with you. I think it's real, because I think we've seen Eric Spoelstra make these kinds of choices in the past, and he's comfortable making them. I'm just not sure what the thought process is, because Haywood's healthy. He's looked like a factor out there, especially defensively when he has played. He hasn't been poor in his minutes out there, and yet somehow he's just not earning the playing time. So I know that they're deeper. I know they're looking for an offensive spark, and I think that's why they went with Alec Burks in Washington. I think they're going to continue to go with Burks when they need that spark, but that's not to relegate Highsmith to a role where he's not out there at all. And I know some of the depth concerns require you to do things a little differently, but at the same time, he signed him to a free agency contract, and I don't think that you want to be – I don't know that you'd want to have him on this roster and not be able to play him, even if they're trying to reincorporate Josh Richardson, who's made his way back from injury, et cetera. So I'm not sure. I think it's real, and I think, unfortunately, it's probably something that we'll see more often over the course of the season.
Pelle Larsson got minutes over him. in that
Yeah,
Mexico City game. And that was a little, because I understood the calculus of, well, we want more guards out there, a little bit more playmaking.
Sure.
So sometimes it'll be Alec Burks, sometimes it's Drew Smith, whatever it is. But to have Pelle Larsson play over Haywood Highsmith, that to me is interesting. There's something going on here. And I'm not necessarily nefarious, but I think maybe it's Eric Spoelstra deciding I'm leaning into offense, and Haywood Highsmith is a 0 on offense. Despite the fact that he shot 40% from 3 last year, nobody cares. Opponents don't close out on him. They leave him open, and we need to maximize the spacing as much as we can. And then maybe at some point he finds a way to play him more. But I'll be interested to see what it looks like against Sacramento. This will be a good test case because on one hand, it's you're like, well, they got a lot of offensive weapons. It would be nice to have Haywood Highsmith out there to guard DeMar DeRozan or De'Aaron Fox or these guys. On the other hand, you could say, hey, this team is a high-powered offensive team. We got to catch up. So we're going to play Alec Burks and all these other guys instead to try to make sure that we can catch up catch up offensively. So it'll be interesting to see. This will be a good test case to see where it is that Eric Spoelstra sees Haywood Highsmith. And more important, maybe not even Haywood Highsmith necessarily, but just the strategy overall with how Spo is approaching the season, at least at this stage of the year. That'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. Your favorite podcast now is a newsletter introducing the Locked On Heat Daily Newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Heat newsletter.